87 invitations. That was the number I sent. Cream cardstock hand-addressed in the brown ink Marcus picked, because he said black looked like a bill and blue looked like a birthday. 87 invitations to my side of the family, aunts, uncles, cousins, my parents, my sister. I mailed them on a Tuesday in April, 6 weeks before the wedding, because my grandmother always said, paper invitations carry weight, and early ones carry respect. 2 weeks later, my sister Colette posted on Instagram, engagement party, same date as my wedding, same Saturday in May, afternoon into evening. 88 invitations, one more than mine. I did the math in the parking lot of the post office sitting in my car with the engine off. 88. She could have sent 70 or 100 or any number that wasn't 87 plus 1. But Colette has always needed to be slightly larger in every room, and she has never been subtle about the measurements. Marcus's family confirmed 6. His parents, his brother Theo, Theo's girlfriend Ava, and 2 seats reserved for an aunt and uncle who ended up sending a gift instead. My side 0. Not one RSVP card came back. Not one phone call. The mailbox stayed empty for weeks, and each day I checked it, the same emptiness looked back at me, a specific kind of nothing louder than any answer. On my wedding day, 11 people sat in a venue set for 94. And when my mother texted me during the cake cutting, I looked at the message, looked at the photo she'd attached, and I smiled. I need to go back to the beginning. The Friday before the wedding, I was at the Chatham County Recorder's office in Savannah filing a lien release for a client. I work as a paralegal at Maitland & Cole, a mid-size litigation firm on Bay Street that handles mostly estates, trusts, and property disputes. The job suits me. I have always been the person who reads the fine print, who checks the notarization dates, who verifies the witness signatures. Other people find this tedious. I find it calming the way some people find gardening calming or running calming, the steady work of placing things in their correct order. The recorder's office closes at 5, and by 4:15 the clerks were already shuffling papers into neat stacks, eyeing the door. I dropped the filing in the correct tray and turned to leave, but my hand paused at the end of the aisle. 3 rows down, second cabinet from the floor. That was the drawer. 8 months earlier, I had opened it while pulling property records for a boundary dispute, and inside I had found a document that rearranged the architecture of my family without anyone knowing. I kept walking. Tomorrow was my wedding. The document could wait. It had been waiting for 6 years already. Outside, Savannah was doing its late afternoon performance. The live oaks draped in Spanish moss, the light going thick and gold over the brick buildings on Broughton Street. The air so humid it pressed against my skin like a warm palm. I drove home through streets I have driven 1,000 times past the squares with their monuments and their benches and their tourists posing in front of the fountain in Forsyth Park, and the city looked the same as it always does, except that everything about tomorrow was unknown, and the why, not knowing, had settled into the spaces between my ribs like water filling a glass. That evening, Marcus and I sat at the kitchen table in our apartment, going over the final details. The caterer had confirmed for 94. The florist would arrive at noon. The string quartet had the playlist. The photographer, a young woman named Cass, who Marcus had found through a colleague, would meet us at the venue by 1:30. Everything was organized, labeled, scheduled. I am good at that. I have always been good at that. My desk at work has a label maker and a filing system with color-coded tabs, and Marcus once joked that I would organize the apocalypse into a spreadsheet and still meet the deadline. He looked at the seating chart, then at me. 6, confirmed from my side, he said. Your side, that's probably the final number. He set the chart down. He has a way of going very still when he is angry and does not want to show it. His shoulders square, and his hands go flat on whatever surface is nearest, as if he's bracing a wall. Marcus is a civil engineer for the county, a man who builds retaining walls and drainage systems, and knows the load-bearing capacity of every beam in every structure he touches. When he is angry, his body becomes a structure too, weight-distributed joints locked, nothing moving that doesn't need to move. Do you want to call your mom? He asked. No, Nora. I don't want to hear her explain why she can't come. I already know the script. Colette needs her more. Colette's event was planned first. I stopped. She'll say it was planned first, even though it wasn't, and I will have to choose between correcting her and keeping the peace, and I am tired of that choice. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled his chair around the table until he was beside me, not across from me. If nobody comes, he said, I'm still going to marry you in front of all those empty chairs, and I'm going to mean every word louder than the silence. I pressed my forehead against his shoulder. He smelled like sawdust and Irish spring, because he'd spent the afternoon sanding the floors in the house we were buying a fixer-upper in Ardsley Park that he had already started working on, even though we hadn't closed. Yet, Marcus builds things. It is what he does instead of making speeches. When he proposed, he didn't get on one knee in a restaurant. He built a bench in our backyard out of reclaimed oak and hid the ring box in the joint where the seat met the armrest, and he asked me to sit with him, and I found the box when I leaned back, and he said, I figured the bench would last longer than any speech I could give. I told him about the dress. My grandmother's 1,967 silk organza wedding gown had been in a garment bag in my parents' storage unit for 9 years since grandmother passed. I had always planned to wear it. The dress was legendary in our family. Grandmother had worn it to marry my grandfather in Augusta in 1967, and in the photos she looked like a column of light, the organza catching the sun in a way that made her glow. When I was a girl, she would take it out of the garment bag and hold it up against me and say, someday. 6 weeks ago, when I drove to Augusta to pick it up, the garment bag was gone. The storage unit was half empty, as if someone had been through it. My mother said it was probably packed away somewhere else. She said she'd look. She never called back. So I bought an ivory sheath from a shop on Broughton Street. Simple. Clean. Mine. I should explain about the invitations about what happened in those 2 weeks between my mailing and Colette's announcement. I sent them on a Tuesday. Marcus and I had been engaged for 4 months by then. The wedding date had been set since January. Everyone in the family knew. I had called my mother in December, the day after Marcus proposed, and she had said, "Congratulations," in a voice that sounded like she was reading it off a card. I had called Colette, who said, "Oh wow, that's great," and then spent 40 minutes talking about a guy she'd been seeing for 3 weeks. This was not new. This was the family's operating system, running the same program it had been running since we were children. Colette is 3 years younger than me, and has been the center of the family's gravity since the day she was born. She was the pretty baby, the easy child, the one whose smile made strangers stop my mother on the street. She was the one who got the lead in the school play. She was the one who threw a tantrum at my high school graduation, so spectacular that my mother spent the entire reception in the parking lot calming her down. I ate cake alone inside. My father read the sports section on his phone. I am not saying Colette is evil. I am saying she has never been asked to share a room with anyone else's needs, and so she never learned how. And every time I came close to having a moment of my own, Colette's gravitational pull yanked the attention back. She did not do this on purpose, or she did, or the distinction between instinct and intention had collapsed so long ago it no longer mattered. So the invitations went out, and for 2 weeks, the only responses were from Marcus's family and 2 of my coworkers. Then Colette's Instagram post appeared. A photo of her left hand, a ring I didn't recognize on a man I'd never met, a caption. He asked. I said, "Yes, engagement party, May 17th, 3 p.m. Save the date, May 17th, my wedding day." The comments were full of hearts and congratulations. My Aunt Patricia wrote, "We'll be there, baby girl." My cousin Denise posted 3 fire emojis. My mother commented a single red heart. I sat in my car outside the post office and scrolled through every comment, one by one, mapping the names against the list of people who had received my invitation. The overlap was complete. Every person celebrating Colette's engagement party was someone who had been invited to my wedding and had not responded. None of them mentioned the conflict. None of them seemed to register the date, or maybe they all registered it, and the choice was that easy. I closed the app. I drove home. I did not call Colette. I did not call my mother. I did not post a passive-aggressive reminder about my own event. I marked the date and kept planning my wedding because the wedding was never about who showed up. It was about who I was becoming, and I was becoming someone who did not beg. Marcus asked me that night if I was okay. I told him the truth. I was not surprised. I had been watching this pattern for 31 years, the way you watch a tide come in. You can map it. You can predict the exact moment the water reaches the line you drew in the sand. You cannot stop it, but you can choose where you stand when it arrives. "Where are you standing?" he asked. "Dry ground." The morning of the wedding, I woke at 7. Marcus was already up, ironing his shirt in the kitchen. The apartment smelled like coffee and starch, and the morning light was coming through the east-facing windows in long golden bars that striped the floor. His mother, June, had called to say they were on the highway, all 6 of them, 2 hours out. I checked my phone while the coffee brewed. No messages from my family, no good luck, no thinking of you, no on our way. The silence had a shape by then. It was a clean rectangle, the exact dimensions of a phone screen with nothing on it. I got dressed alone. The ivory sheath zipped up the back, and I reached behind myself and pulled the zipper with one hand, the way you do when there is no one to ask. I had imagined this moment differently. When I was a girl, I used to picture getting dressed for my wedding the way I'd seen it in movies, surrounded by women. My mother behind me adjusting the veil, my sister holding the bouquet, everyone crying, the kind of tears that mean you are loved so much, it leaks out of people's eyes. Instead, the bathroom was quiet, and the only sound was the zipper traveling up my spine and the hum of the air conditioner in the window. I did my own makeup at the bathroom mirror. Mascara, a little blush lip color that Marcus once said, made me look like I'd been eating strawberries. My hands were steady, except once on the second coat of mascara when my fingers trembled and I had to blink the wand away from my lashes and wait. The tremor was brief. It came from somewhere below my ribs, from the place where the body stores what the mind has already processed and filed away. The hollow feeling spread through my sternum and into my arms, and for one breath, 2 breaths, my body refused to agree with what my mind had already accepted. The mind can prepare for absence. The body grieves it in its own time. I steadied. I put the phone in my clutch. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman I did not expect, not the bride from the magazines, surrounded by her mother and her sister and her friends, all of them crying and laughing. Just a woman in a simple dress, standing in her own bathroom, about to marry the man she loved, in front of a room that might echo. She was enough. I was enough. I drove to the venue. Whitfield Gardens sits on the eastern outskirts of Savannah, past the last strip of commercial road, and into a stretch of live oaks that canopy the highway so completely the light turns green and gold even at midday. The estate was built in 1898 by a cotton merchant abandoned in the 1970s, when the family money ran out, and restored 10 years ago by a couple who turned it into an event space. Wisteria arbors line the central path. The ceremony area is a sweep of lawn with a stone terrace behind it for receptions, and the terrace overlooks a small pond where turtles sun themselves on the bank. On a good day, the light in that garden looks like someone spilled honey through the trees. I chose Whitfield because of the wisteria. My grandmother had a wisteria arbor in her backyard in Augusta, a massive purple cascade that she tended every year, pruning it back in winter and watching it explode in April. When I was small, I used to sit under it while she gardened, and the purple blossoms would fall in my hair, and she'd say, "Wisteria is patient. It takes years to bloom, but when it does, it covers everything." I am not sure she was talking about the plant. The venue was set for 94. White chairs in 10 rows of 9 plus 4 on the end. Flowers on every aisle marker, peonies and gardenias, because grandmother grew both, and I learned the names before I learned cursive. A 3-tier cake on the reception terrace, lemon with buttercream frosting. Grandmother's recipe, which I had baked myself the day before, with Marcus holding the mixer while I zested 6 lemons by hand. Place cards at 10 round tables, each one hand-lettered by me over 3 evenings, while Marcus watched baseball in the other room and periodically brought me tea. The string quartet was warming up near the arbor, playing something soft and circular that I didn't recognize. I walked through the empty rows. The chairs were brilliant in the afternoon sun, and they looked less like seats and more like a congregation of small white ghosts, present and patient, and waiting for bodies that would not arrive. The air was thick with gardenia and heat, and the sweetness clung to my lungs in a way that made them tighten. A room full of flowers smells different when there aren't enough living people to absorb the scent. It becomes cloying. It becomes the smell of a funeral parlor. I have been to enough funerals to know the difference between flowers that celebrate and flowers that mourn, and these flowers standing in their vases in an empty garden could not decide which they were. My stomach turned. A wave of nausea, brief and sharp, and I pressed my hand against one of the white chairs to steady myself. The metal frame was hot from the sun. I counted the rows 10. I counted the chairs in the first row 9. I did the multiplication because numbers are what I reach for when the world tilts, and the math gave me something solid to hold. The caterer, Mrs. Linden, approached from the terrace. She was a compact woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the diplomatic composure of someone who has managed 100 events and knows exactly when one is going sideways. She looked at the empty chairs. She looked at me. She did not ask the question her eyes were asking. "Are we adjusting the timeline?" she said instead. "No." "Ceremony at 3. She nodded once and went back to the kitchen. She did not ask about the chairs. I was grateful for that. There is a kindness in not asking a question you already know the answer to, in letting someone keep their composure by pretending it doesn't need keeping. Marcus arrived at 2:15 with his family. His mother, June, came to me first. She is a short woman with strong arms and silver-streaked hair that she wears natural, and she hugged me the way she always does, which is completely both arms, full pressure, long enough to mean it. She held on for an extra beat this time. The extra beat was for the people who should have been hugging me and weren't. Marcus's father, Gerald, shook my hand and said, "You look beautiful." His voice was steady and matter-of-fact, the way he says everything, as if beauty is not an opinion, but a measurement he has taken and confirmed. Then he walked to the chairs and sat on the left side, my side. He did not ask which side was whose. He simply looked at the arrangement, did his own math, and chose accordingly. I would learn later that June had told them all on the drive down to sit on Nora's side, no exceptions, because that girl needs to see faces when she looks left. Theo and Ava sat beside him. Then Lisa from my office arrived with David, a senior associate who had worked with me on the estate litigation cases for 3 years. Lisa is the kind of coworker who remembers your birthday and brings you a latte when your case goes sideways, and she carried a small wrapped gift that clinked when she set it on the table. David wore a tie that didn't match his shirt, which meant he'd dressed in a hurry, which meant he'd come because he wanted to, not because he'd planned to. Those are the arrivals that matter most. 11 people. 94 place settings. 83. Empty chairs catching the sun. I stood at the back of the aisle and looked down the rows. The quartet was playing. The officiant, a retired minister named Reverend Cole, who had married Gerald and June 35 years ago, was in position under the arbor. Marcus was standing beside him in the suit he'd bought at a shop in downtown Savannah, charcoal gray, with a white shirt and no tie, because he said ties make him look like a hostage. His face when he saw me was open and sure, and it was the only face I needed in that garden. I walked the aisle alone. There was no one to walk me. My father was 90 minutes away at my sister's engagement party, and even if he had been there, I am not sure I would have asked him. The tradition of being given away requires that someone held you first, and my father's hold had always been loose, his attention always drifting toward the louder room. So I walked alone, and the aisle was long, and the chairs on both sides were mostly empty, and my shoes pressed into the soft grass with each step, and the quartet played, and the wisteria above the arbor was in such full bloom that the purple blossoms looked like they might pull the trellis down with their weight. I walked toward Marcus, and with each step, the empty chairs behind me grew smaller, and the man ahead of me grew larger. And by the time I reached the arbor, the math had shifted in my favor. The ceremony was short. Personal vows which we had agreed on because neither of us wanted someone else's words for the most honest thing we'd ever say. Marcus went first. He is not a man who talks about feelings in abstract terms. He builds his love into objects. "I will build us a porch," he said. "I will sand the floors myself. I will carry the groceries in one trip every time, and when you can't sleep at 3 a.m, I will get up and make tea and sit with you until you can. I will never ask you to be smaller, so someone else can feel bigger." That last line landed in my chest. He had never said it before. He said it in front of 11 people and 83 empty chairs, and every word held. My turn. I had written my vows on an index card and memorized them, but standing there looking at Marcus, the memorized words fell away, and what came out was closer to the bone. I used to believe that being chosen by your family was the first proof you were worth choosing. I spent 31 years waiting for that proof, and it never came. And then you showed up. You didn't prove anything. You just stayed. You stayed when it was easy, and you stayed when it wasn't. And you are staying right now in front of a room that should be full and isn't, and you are not flinching. Being chosen by you on a day when it would have been easy to walk away is the only proof I will ever need. The kiss. 11 people clapped. The sound was thin and real, and it did not fill the garden so much as replace the silence with something better. June was crying. Theo was grinning so wide his face looked like it might split. Lisa had her phone up recording. Gerald sat with his hands folded, nodding once the way he acknowledges things that are solid and well-built. The photographer, Cass, moved through the ceremony with quiet efficiency. I would see the photos later and find that the light had been perfect, that the wisteria was at full bloom, and that in the wide shots, the empty chairs behind us looked less like absence and more like white wings folded shut, waiting for apparition, congregation that existed somewhere else in some other version of this day, and had simply gotten lost. The reception began at 4 on the stone terrace. Somewhere between the ceremony and the first toast, Mrs. Linden had worked a quiet miracle. The 10 round tables were gone. In their place, she had pushed 2 long tables together, in an L shape, covered them in the white linens and the peony centerpieces, and removed every extra place card. She had folded new napkins and repositioned the candles so the light would pool in the center of the group instead of scattering across an empty room. The effect was intimate instead of vacant, a dinner party instead of a banquet. She had done this without asking, without drawing attention, and when I caught her eye across the terrace, I mouthed, "Thank you," and she gave me a small nod that carried more kindness than a speech. Gerald told a story about the time 13-year-old Marcus tried to build a treehouse in the backyard, and the whole structure collapsed onto their retriever, who was sleeping underneath. "Dog was fine," Gerald said. "Slept through the whole thing." Marcus cried for an hour. June swatted his arm and said, "He was 12, Gerald." Gerald said he was 13 and a half, and he rebuilt it the next weekend, and that second treehouse lasted until we sold the house. Theo confirmed this with the authority of a younger brother, who spent his childhood testing the structural integrity of everything Marcus built. Everyone laughed, and the laughter bounced off the stone terrace and sounded almost normal, almost like a wedding reception where nothing was missing. The food was excellent. Shrimp and grits, collard greens, cornbread with honey butter. The caterer had adjusted the portions so that the dishes looked full rather than cavernous. The lemon cake waited on its stand, 3 tiers of buttercream glowing in the late sun. My phone buzzed twice in my clutch, and I let it stay there. At 4:45, a woman appeared at the edge of the terrace. She was in her early 60s, tall and upright with dark skin and a silver silk blouse, and she carried a small, cream-colored envelope in both hands, the way you carry something irreplaceable. I did not recognize her. She walked toward me and extended her hand. "Nora," she said. "My name is Ruth Okafor. Your grandmother Mei Lin was my dearest friend for the last 8 years of her life. She asked me to give you something on this day." I shook her hand. Her grip was warm and certain. "How did you know about the wedding?" Mei Lin told me the date. "She died 3 years ago." Ruth smiled, and it was the kind of smile that carries a secret it has been keeping patiently. "She told me you'd get married on a Saturday in May, at a garden in Savannah. She was very specific. She said you'd pick a place with wisteria because you always loved her arbor in Augusta. I've been checking the Savannah wedding listings every spring since she passed. I did not know what to say. The idea of my grandmother 3 years dead still arranging things from the other side of whatever comes next was so entirely in character that it made my throat ache." I led Ruth to a chair at our table, and Marcus poured her a glass of water, and she sat down as if she had been expected all along. After a few minutes, Ruth asked if we could speak privately. We walked to a stone bench at the edge of the garden, where the lawn met a line of crepe myrtles in full pink bloom. The noise from the terrace softened behind us. A turtle slid off the bank of the pond and disappeared into the water without a sound. Ruth placed the envelope on the bench between us. "Your grandmother wrote this 2 months before she died. She gave it to me and said, 'Ruth, give this to Nora on her wedding day. Not before, she'll need it then.' I've kept it in my bureau for 3 years. I touched the envelope. My name on the front in grandmother's handwriting, which was small and angular and looked like a doctor's, but was actually a calligrapher's trained hand gone casual with age. There is something else, Ruth said. She folded her hands in her lap, and her voice shifted into a register that was lower and more careful the way people speak when they are delivering information they have been carrying for a long time. Your grandmother changed her estate plan 3 years before she passed. She set up a trust. She told me about it because I was a probate clerk before I retired, and she wanted someone outside the family to know. She said, "Colette will be taken care of by everyone. Colette has never lacked for attention or advocacy. Nora will need to take care of herself, so I'm giving her the means." I was still. The bench was warm from the sun. A gardenia blossom had fallen on the stone path near my foot, and I looked at it white and waxy, and already starting to brown at the edges. She also told me about the dress, Ruth said, the silk organza gown. She said it was for you. She told your mother this directly more than once. She said, "The dress goes to the one who carries herself with grace, not the one who demands a crown." My mother chose to hear it differently, I said. Ruth did not disagree. She sat with me in the silence, and the silence between us was a different kind than the silence I had been living with all day. It was the silence of two people who understand the same thing and do not need to explain it. I opened the envelope. The letter was a single page, handwritten front and back in grandmother's angular script. I read it through once slowly. My eyes moved across her words, and my hand stayed steady, and the garden was very quiet, except for the distant sound of Gerald's voice telling another story on the terrace. When I finished, I folded the letter back into its creases, slid it into the envelope, and pressed it flat against my chest. "I found the trust filing," I said. 8 months ago, at the county recorder's office in Savannah, I was pulling property records for a client, and her name came up in the grantor index. Ruth's eyes softened. Something in her posture released as if she had been bracing for the possibility that she would have to explain everything, and was now relieved to find she did not. She told me you'd find it yourself. She said you were the only one in the family who reads the fine print. I almost laughed. Grandmother had a way of making foresight sound like common sense. Let me tell you about the day I found it. 8 months before my wedding on a Thursday morning in September, I was at the Chatham County Recorder's office, pulling deed histories for a boundary dispute. My client owned a lot in Thunderbolt, a small community east of Savannah, and the neighbor was claiming an easement that didn't exist. I was cross-referencing the grantor-grantee index going back 30 years, a tedious process that involves flipping through ledger books and cross-checking digital entries against original filings, when I saw a name I completed in Cedia's. Recognized, Chen Mei Lin, trust document, filed 6 years prior. My hand stopped on the page. I looked at the entry for a long time. Then I pulled the file. It was an irrevocable trust, properly executed, notarized with 2 witnesses whose signatures I did not recognize. The grantor was my grandmother. The trustee was an attorney in Augusta named Harold Vance, whom I had never met. The sole beneficiary was me, Nora Elaine Chen. The asset, a mixed-use commercial building at 412 Broad Street, Augusta, Georgia, containing 2 retail spaces on the ground floor and 4 apartments above. At the time of filing, the appraised value was $1.1 million. I read it 3 times. I checked the notarization date, the witness signatures, the legal description of the property, the trustee's bar number. Everything was in order. The document was airtight, in the way that only a carefully drafted legal instrument can be precise, thorough, and deliberately beyond the reach of amendment. That is what irrevocable means. It cannot be taken back. I drove to the probate court the next morning and confirmed the trust was properly filed, currently active, and had never been challenged or modified. The clerk who pulled the record did not ask why I was looking. I did not volunteer. That evening, I went home and sat on the couch for a long time. The apartment was quiet. Marcus was working late at a job site. I held the photocopy of the trust in my lap and stared at my grandmother's name at the top and my name at the bottom, and between them the legal language that said in its formal and unemotional way that a woman I loved had looked at her family and made a choice, and the choice was me. I did not tell Marcus for 2 weeks. When I finally did, spreading the photocopy across our kitchen table after dinner, he read it twice, looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" "Nothing." Yet, he nodded. Marcus does not push. He waits, and the waiting is not passive. It is a kind of trust, the human kind, which is rarer than the legal kind and harder to draft. I had my reasons for keeping silent. If I told my family, my mother would ask me to share the property with Colette, because that is what she always asks, and the asking would be dressed up as fairness, but would really be about managing Colette's reaction. My father would defer to my mother the way he defers to whoever is loudest. Colette would claim grandmother was confused, or that I had manipulated her, or that the trust was a mistake, or all 3 at once, because Colette has never met a narrative she couldn't rewrite to place herself at the center. Someone would hire a lawyer to contest the trust, and they would lose because I was 25 when it was filed living in Savannah, 200 miles from grandmother's attorney. I had not asked for it. I had not known about it. The law was clear, and I let the law be enough. Marcus had saved my seat and placed a fresh glass of water beside my plate. Ruth was sitting next to June, and they were deep in conversation about Savannah's historic restoration projects, which was Ruth's area of passion and June's area of polite curiosity. The 2 of them looked like they had been friends for years, leaning toward each other with the easy posture of women who have run out of small talk and arrived at the place where the real conversation lives. I sat down. I picked up my phone. 3 missed calls from my mother. 1 text message. "Call me. Urgent." Below the text, a photo. I tapped it open. Colette stood in front of a flower arch, her arms spread wide, her smile, the one she uses for cameras, the one that shows every tooth, and crinkles her eyes at angles she has practiced in front of mirrors since she was 15. Behind her, I could count at least 40 people. I saw my Aunt Patricia in a green dress, my Uncle Ray with his arm around his wife, my cousins Denise and Kyle standing near the bar. My father in the back, half turned away, a drink in his hand, looking at his phone. And in the second row, a cluster of faces I recognized from childhood neighbors, from the old street women, from my mother's book club, a couple from church who had known our family for 20 years. All of them at Colette's engagement party. Every one of them who did not come to my wedding. Colette was wearing grandmother's dress, the 1,967 silk organza gown, the one that disappeared from the storage unit, the one my mother said was probably packed away somewhere. It was on Colette. The neckline was right, the sweep of the skirt was right, the way the fabric caught the light in the photo was right, but the fit was wrong. Colette is taller than me by 3 inches and narrower in the hips, and I could see where the fabric was pinched at the waist, held in place with pins that caught the flash of someone's camera. The hem fell an inch too short, hovering above her ankles, where it should have brushed the floor. The dress had been made for grandmother, who was my height, my build. It was made for a woman shaped like me. I stared at the photo. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, and I tilted the screen so he could see. His jaw tightened. That muscle in the side of his face that moves when he is holding something back. The one I can read the way I read legal filings, with precision and complete comprehension. But I looked at the photo, and I saw past the dress, past the crowd, past the flower arch. I saw Colette's eyes. Even in the photo, even mid-smile, her eyes were scanning the room, checking, counting, making sure everyone was watching, making sure she was the center, the way she has always needed to be the center. Not out of calculated cruelty, but out of a hunger so deep it has no floor. Colette does not steal attention because she is evil. She steals it because she is empty, and the attention is the only thing that fills her, and it drains out as fast as she can pour it in. And so she has to keep filling, keep performing, keep being the brightest thing in the room. And it is exhausting to watch, and it must be unbearable to live. I looked down at my own dress, the ivory sheath from the shop on Broughton Street. It fit. It was mine. No one had to pin it. No one had to steal it. I chose it, bought it, zipped it up myself, and it lay against my body like it belonged there. I smiled. The smile was not revenge. It was not satisfaction or schadenfreude or any of the sharp-edged feelings that live in the place where hurt meets vindication. It was the specific release of a weight I had been carrying for so long, I had forgotten it was separate from my body. The weight of needing my family to see me. The weight of measuring my value by their attendance. I set it down in that moment, in the golden light of a Savannah afternoon, at a table with 11 people who came, and I let it go. Marcus said, "Are you okay? I'm going to call her back." I went inside the venue to a small room off the main hall that smelled like old wood and lemon polish. A window looked out onto the back garden where the last of the afternoon sun was turning the crepe myrtles copper. I closed the door. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, and her voice was the voice she uses when she has been caught in something and is trying to get ahead of the guilt. High fast, a little breathless. "Nora, I just saw Colette. She's wearing your grandmother's dress. I didn't know she had it. She must have taken it from the storage unit. I am so sorry. I had no idea she would do this. I know. You know she took it. I know she's wearing it. I saw the photo you sent." A pause. The sound of a party in the background, muffled laughter, the bass line of a song I couldn't identify. "Then I should have been there today, Nora. I should have come to your wedding." Yes, you should have. The silence between us was the kind that has furniture in it, heavy and cluttered with years of conversations that went the same way, her asking me to understand me, understanding the pattern, repeating until the pattern became the relationship, and the relationship became a pattern, and there was no way to tell where one ended and the other began. Everyone came here, she said, and her voice was smaller, now the voice of a woman hearing herself and not liking the sound. The whole family. Colette's party. I thought you would understand. You've always been the strong one, Nora. You don't need me the way she does. I do understand, Mom. That's the problem. I understand exactly why you chose her party. I have always understood. I understood when she threw a tantrum at my high school graduation, and you spent the reception calming her down in the parking lot. I understood when she announced her trip to Europe, the same week I passed the paralegal exam, and the family dinner became about her itinerary. I understood when she called you 17 times during my college move-in day, because she missed you, and you drove back home before my boxes were unpacked. I have spent my whole life understanding, and I am done. Nora, please. The dress is a dress, Mom. Colette can keep it. It doesn't fit her, and she'll figure that out eventually. What do you mean? I mean, Grandmother gave me something more important than a dress, and I found it on my own, the way she always said I would. I don't understand. What are you talking about? You'll find out. Through proper channels, the way legal things work. I heard my mother breathing on the other end, and I could map the exact shape of her confusion, the way it mixed with guilt and the faint reflexive urge to defend Colette even now. I could have explained everything in that moment. I could have told her about the trust, the building, the $1.4 million filing sitting in the probate court. I could have detonated that information over the phone and listened to the silence afterward, the specific silence of a woman discovering that the daughter she overlooked was the one who was chosen. I chose not to. The trust would surface on its own, through the estate attorney, through the legal process that my grandmother had set in motion 6 years ago, with the calm precision of a woman who loved both her granddaughters and trusted only one. I have to go, I said. We're cutting the cake. Nora, wait. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up. I stood in that small room for a minute breathing. The lemon polish smell was sharp and clean. I pressed my hands flat on the old wooden table and felt the grain under my palms, and I was in my body fully for the first time all day. The grief was still there. It sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and smooth and permanent. But beside it, occupying the same space without crowding, it was something else, the clean, solid knowledge that I had stood in my own authority and spoken the truth without cruelty, without begging, without performing. I had said what was real and let it be enough. When I came back to the terrace, Marcus was waiting with a cake knife. The lemon cake stood on its 3 tiers, the buttercream smoothed and glossy, a few sprigs of fresh lavender tucked between the layers. Grandmother's recipe. I had found it in her recipe box when I was 8, written on a yellowed index card in her angular handwriting, "Lemon cake for someone who stays." The title had never made sense before. Standing there with cake on my fingers and my husband beside me, it did. Marcus and I held the knife together and cut the first slice. 11 people cheered. The sound bounced off the stone terrace and scattered into the garden where the wisteria caught it and held it in the leaves. I ate my slice slowly. The cake was tart and sweet and dense in the way that only real butter and fresh lemons and patience can make. It tasted like Grandmother's kitchen on Saturday mornings when I was 8 or 9 or 10, and she stood at the counter in Augusta and taught me to cream butter and sugar by hand, my small arm aching from the wooden spoon the mixture, slowly turning pale and fluffy under the pressure. Colette would try for a minute, complain that her arm hurt, and go watch TV. I would stay working the spoon in slow circles, and Grandmother would lean against the counter with her coffee and watch me and say, "You're the only one who stays long enough to learn." The light turned golden. Late afternoon in Savannah, when the Spanish moss catches the low sun, and the whole city looks like it has been dipped in amber. Cass circled the table, taking candids, her camera clicking softly. She caught one of me laughing with buttercream on my thumb, and it would become my favorite photo from the wedding, not because of how I looked, but because of the expression on Marcus's face behind me, pride and love and a contained fury. For the people who had made those chairs empty, all of it, held in the set of his jaw and the softness of his eyes, which are two different emotions in two different parts of his face, and both of them were for me. The evening wound down slowly, the way good evenings do, when there is nowhere to be and no one to perform for. Gerald and June said their goodbyes around 8. June hugged me again long and full, and this time she said, "You're family now, and we don't skip family." It was the kind of sentence that sounds simple until you hear it on the day your own family skipped you, and then it breaks something open that needed breaking. Gerald handed me a small envelope. Inside was a check. "We've been saving this for his wedding," he said. "Glad we finally get to use it." Theo hugged his brother and whispered something in his ear that made Marcus laugh a real laugh, the kind that shakes his shoulders and changes the shape of his face. Ava squeezed my hand and said she'd send the video she took of the vows. Lisa said, "For the record, that was the most beautiful wedding I've ever been to, and I've been to 30. David shook Marcus's hand and said, "You did good, man," which was enough. Ruth was the last to leave. She stood by her car in the parking lot, the live oaks forming a dark canopy above us and the first stars appearing in the gaps between the leaves. She held both my hands. Mei Lin would have been in the front row, she said. She would have been so proud she wouldn't have been able to sit still. She would have clapped the loudest. She would have brought a casserole and 3 desserts and told the caterer how to do her job. I laughed, and the laugh turned wet at the edges, and Ruth squeezed my hands harder. "Read the letter when you're ready," she said. She meant every word. I already know. Ruth drove off, and the taillights disappeared into the tunnel of live oaks. And then it was just us, Nora and Marcus married, standing in an empty parking lot in Savannah, Georgia, with a trunk full of leftover lemon cake, and the last light draining from the sky. We drove home. The car was quiet. Not the bad kind. The kind where 2 people have gone through something together and the silence is a shared room they can both sit in. Marcus reached over and held my hand on the gear shift, and I held back, and the road unspooled through the dark trees, and the headlights carved a path through the Spanish moss shadows. In the car, I opened Grandmother's letter. Marcus drove, and I read it by the glow of my phone screen. Most of it was between her and me. Private words, the kind that lose their power in retelling, that exist only in the space between the person who wrote them and the person they were written for. But near the end, she wrote, "You were never the quiet one, Nora. You were the one who listened. There is a difference, and it is everything." I folded the letter and held it in my lap for the rest of the drive. 4 months later, I was sitting at the kitchen table in our new house. The Ardsley Park fixer-upper was ours, mortgage signed, keys in hand, every room a project and a promise. Marcus had refinished the living room floors himself, as he said he would in his vows, and the whole house smelled like polyurethane and sawdust, and the specific warmth of a home that is being built by the people who live in it. He was in the backyard, working on the porch frame, the sound of his drill punctuating the afternoon in regular, purposeful bursts. On the table in front of me, a letter from the estate attorney handling Grandmother's affairs. The estate had finalized. The irrevocable trust had been executed. The mixed-use commercial building at 412 Broad Street, Augusta, Georgia, now appraised at $1.4 million, was officially and solely in my name. I set the letter down and poured a glass of water and drank it, and then the phone rang. Colette. I hadn't heard her voice since before the wedding. 4 months of silence that I did not break or mourn. I answered. "The lawyer says the building is yours." No hello. No preamble. Her voice was the one I have always known best. The pitched, pressurized voice of Colette being denied something she was certain was hers. It is the voice of a woman whose identity is constructed entirely from external validation, and who experiences any distribution of resources that does not favor her as a personal attack. It is. That can't be right. Grandmother would never leave you the building. She loved me. She always said she'd take care of me. She did love you. Mom, Dad, the aunts, the uncles, the whole family. They have always taken care of you, Colette. They took care of you on my wedding day. Grandmother left me the building because she knew no one else was going to take care of me. You stole this. You manipulated her somehow. I was 25 when she filed the trust. I was living in Savannah. I hadn't visited Augusta in 6 months. I didn't know her attorney's name. I didn't know the trust existed until I found the filing 8 months ago by accident while doing my job. Silence on the line. I heard the faint noise of a television in Colette's background, the murmur of someone else's life being narrated by someone else's screen. Mom says you should share it. She says that's what Grandmother would have wanted. Grandmother wanted exactly what she wrote down, signed, and had notarized in front of 2 witnesses. They say what a person means when no one can ask them anymore. She hung up. I set the phone on the table and looked at it. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel the hot rush of vindication that I had imagined in weaker moments, lying awake at 3 a.m. while Marcus slept beside me and the house creaked around us. What I felt was the heavy, clean weight of someone else's trust in me given freely without my asking, and the obligation to carry it without bending. Marcus came through the back door, sawdust on his forearms, drill still in his hand. He saw my face. How bad? She'll call back. They always call back. He set the drill on the counter and sat down beside me. The kitchen was half painted, the cabinets still, the original 1940s wood that we planned to keep, and the late afternoon light came through the window above the sink in a way that made the room glow the way Savannah light does, when it decides to be generous. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm okay." He put his hand on the table, palm up. I placed mine on top of it, and his fingers closed around mine, and we sat there for a while, not talking, while the drill cooled on the counter and the porch waited outside, half-built and patient. That evening I sat on the porch. Marcus had built the frame and laid 2 planks across it, enough for 2 people to sit, if they didn't mind the gaps between the boards and the absence of a railing. I sat with a mug of tea and my legs stretched out over the edge, and the Savannah evening settled around me like warm water, thick with jasmine from the neighbor's yard, and the sound of crickets tuning up for the night shift. I used to measure love by attendance. Who showed up? Who called? Who sent the card? Who sat in the chair? I built a ledger in my head and checked it every holiday, every birthday, every crisis, marking who was present and who was absent, and the math never balanced. The credits were always short, the debits always growing. I carried that ledger for years, adding entries, cross-referencing, convinced that if I could just get the numbers right, I could prove something essential about my worth. The ledger is closed now. I do not mean it is forgiven. I mean I have stopped keeping it. The columns are still there, the entries still legible, but I no longer run the totals. The math was never going to balance because the math was never the point. The point was that I was counting it all, and counting is what you do when you don't trust the value to be there without proof. Grandmother left me a building. She also left me a letter. She also left me a recipe for lemon cake titled "For Someone Who Stays." These things are not equal in market value, but they are equal in what they say, which is, I saw you. I saw you when you stayed in the kitchen while your sister watched TV. I saw you when you read every page of every document while everyone else skimmed. I saw you when the family's attention was always on someone else, and I chose you not because you were better, but because you were the one who would carry the weight, without breaking, and without asking for applause. Colette will keep the dress. She will wear it somewhere else, to some other event where the cameras are on and the audience is full, and it will keep not fitting, and she will keep pinning it, and eventually she will put it in a closet and forget it. The dress was made for a woman who is 5'6" with wide hips and steady hands, and Colette is none of those things, and that is not her fault. She was built for different clothes. I hope she finds them. My mother will call again. She will ask me to share the building. She will use words like family and fairness, and what grandmother would have wanted, and I will tell her what grandmother wanted is written in a legal document filed at the Chatham County Recorder's Office, and if she'd like to read it, she can drive to Savannah. I will not shout. I will not explain myself for the 100th time. I will say what is true and let her sit with it. If she cannot sit with it, that is her chair, not mine. I will not cut them off. I will not make a public declaration of estrangement or post a long statement on social media or send a letter itemizing their failures. That kind of performance belongs to a different family member. What I will do is stop arriving at their table with my hands open, asking to be filled. I will come with my hands already full, or I will not come at all, and the difference will speak for itself. 11 people. That was the number at my wedding. Marcus, his parents, his brother Ava, Ruth, Lisa, David Cass, behind her camera, the officiant, and me. I carry that number like a small, bright stone in my pocket, smooth from being turned over and over in my fingers. Some people would call it small. Some people would call it sad. I call it the truth. 11 people came because they chose to, not because they had to, not because guilt or obligation or the fear of being talked about dragged them to a chair. They came because they wanted to watch me marry the man I love, and they clapped when we kissed, and the sound was thin and real, and it was more than enough. Marcus came outside and sat beside me on the 2 planks. He didn't ask what I was thinking. He brought his own mug of tea and set it on the porch frame and leaned back, and the half-built porch creaked under our combined weight.